All right, welcome to the Explainer. Focused learners, today we are attempting something pretty ambitious. We aren't just going to learn about human memory. We're actually going to hack its very mechanics. So if you've got an introductory psychology exam coming up, or honestly, if you simply want to radically upgrade how your brain retains information, you are in the exact right place.
Seriously, have you ever read an entire textbook page, gotten to the bottom, and realized you remember literally none of it? Yeah, we've all been there. You stare at the page, your eyes track the words perfectly, but 5 minutes later, your mind is a complete blank. Studying can often feel like pouring water into a leaky bucket, right? You put all this effort in, but the data just keeps draining away. Well, cognitive psychology provides the ultimate solution to finally plug that leak. It teaches us exactly how information is processed, categorized, and stored, allowing us to work with our brain's natural architecture rather than constantly fighting against it.
So, here is our game plan for this explainer. 1. The architecture. 2. The catalog. 3. The hack. And 4. An intro psych exam review.
Part 1. The architecture. The Atkinson-Shiffrin model.
Okay, let's dive right in. To really understand memory, we have to start with this foundational blueprint. The brilliant insight from researchers Atkinson and Shiffrin back in 1968 is that they view learning and memory as discontinuous and multi-staged. Basically, information doesn't just instantly magically become a permanent memory. As new data comes in from our environment, it's actively manipulated before it's stored. Their model establishes the exact physical layout of how data moves from that very first initial input step by step toward permanent storage across 3 distinct stages.
Now, what's truly fascinating here is the sheer speed of this very first stage. Sensory memory is this incredibly brief initial portal for all environmental input. If you see something, those visual stimuli linger for as little as half a second, just a flash. If you hear something, auditory stimuli last maybe 4 or 5 seconds. Because it vanishes so unbelievably fast, transferring this data to the next stage is absolutely critical. And the 2 major gatekeepers that actually allow information to pass through this portal are your active attention and automaticity. If you aren't paying attention, that data never even makes it past the lobby.
But if you do happen to be paying attention, that information gets bumped into short-term memory, which is also known as working memory. You can think of this as the conscious, active workbench of your brain. When you're taking in new information right now, like listening to me speak, this is exactly where it's being processed. But here's the catch. The workbench is really small. It generally holds about 5 ± 2 units of information at any given time. And it only keeps it there for about 20 to 30 seconds, unless you actively do something with it. So how do we keep this data from just expiring and falling off the workbench? Well, through rehearsal. A huge flashcard term for you here is maintenance rehearsal. And this is simply repeating information over and over to keep your attention actively focused on it. But be careful here. While maintenance rehearsal keeps data live in short-term memory, if you actually want to move it to long-term storage, you need what's called elaborate rehearsal. That's where you process the new information by linking it up with older information that's already safely stored in your brain, preventing it from being lost entirely.
Part 2. The catalog. Categorizing long-term memory.
Let's move on and see how this all builds into long-term memory. If your data manages to survive the active workbench of short-term memory through rehearsal, it gets passed along to this highly categorized vault. When items enter long-term memory, they don't just get tossed into a big messy pile. They are organized into very specific, specialized categories. You will absolutely see this distinction on your exam. In 1972, a researcher named Endel Tolving was the first to distinguish between 2 major subcategories of what we call declarative memory. First, you have episodic memory. This is your circumstantial, deeply personal experience, like, say, remembering exactly what you wore to your high school graduation. Then you have semantic memory. These are general, abstract concepts and facts, like just knowing that Paris is the capital of France. Semantic memory can be recalled completely independently of how or where you initially learned it. And it is the central focus of studying because it houses the core concepts used to encode new data.
But beyond just facts and events, we've also got procedural memory. Now, this operates totally distinctly from the abstract facts of semantic memory. Procedural memory is your how-to knowledge. It's defined by learned skills and instruction-like memory. Think about knowing how to ride a bike or typing on a keyboard. Often this knowledge has reached a state of complete automaticity, meaning you literally don't even have to consciously think about it to retrieve it and do it.
Now, researchers also contrast how this declarative knowledge is actually formatted in our brains. Thinkers like Abbott and Whitt define declarative memory as information that can be talked about or verbalized, basically putting things into words in your conscious thought. But another researcher, Pivio, adds imagery to the list. Imagery is this incredible memory structure for collecting and storing information specifically related to pictures. It captures data almost exactly like a photograph. So while you can definitely describe a concept using verbal rehearsal, using imagery is incredibly useful because it captures the entire visual presentation and the context of the information all at once.
Part 3. The Hack, Zinchenko and Learning Goals.
All right, now for the really fun part. We know the architecture, right? We know the categories, so how do we actually game the system? Enter Russian psychologist P.I. Zinchenko. Zinchenko ran an experiment testing incidental memory. That is, memory for things you weren't even explicitly trying to memorize in the first place. His basic notion was that words encoded by deep, meaningful means are retained far, far better than superficial encoding. His findings are basically the ultimate key to elaborative rehearsal, that exact mechanism we talked about that forces data off your short-term workbench and permanently locks it into your long-term vault. The absolute game changer he discovered is this. Your specific goal at the exact moment you're looking at the material dictates what you will actually remember. Different goals activate completely different systems of connections in your brain.
Let's actually look at how Zinchenko set this up. He gave his subjects 10 series of 4 words. For example, one series was house, window, building, fish. He split the subjects into 3 groups and just subtly altered the instructions they were given. Group 1 had a different meaning goal. They just had to identify the word with a completely different meaning from the first word, so connecting house and fish. Group 2 had a concrete goal, make a concrete physical connection, like house and window. And Group 3 had a logical goal, make a logical abstract connection, like house and building. Notice that only the second and third conditions actively force the subjects to deeply examine the items for their actual meaning.
And the results? They honestly speak for themselves. After an interrupting task, the subjects were asked to recall the words. The group with the logical goal, the ones who formed abstract logical connections between the target words, had by far the highest level of recall. The concrete group was somewhere in the middle, moderate recall. And that first, no-meaning group, incredibly low. This proves definitively that how you interact with the material matters so much more than just staring at it. If your goal requires deep, logical processing, your brain just stores it effortlessly.
Part 4. Intro Psych Exam Review.
Let's transition now to a quick study guide review. If you have an exam approaching, you'll want to pay close attention here. We're going to do a rapid-fire review of the critical concepts we've just covered. First, the architecture. You absolutely need to know the Atkinson-Shiffrin model and its 3 stages: sensory, short-term, and long-term. Also, take note of a very crucial, kind of tricky distinction they make in the terminology. They use the word memory to refer specifically to the data being retained, while the word store refers to the structural component that actually contains the information. You've got to keep those straight. Remember, the sensory register is the brief portal, STM is your conscious active workbench, and LTM is your permanent categorized vault.
Next up, you should definitely expect some multiple-choice questions on those distinct long-term memory categories. Semantic memory handles abstract facts, totally independent of how you learned them. Episodic memory handles your circumstantial, personal life events. Procedural memory is your instruction-like, how-to skills that often reach a state of automaticity. And remember, declarative memory is the broader umbrella term for information that can be talked about or verbalized, which actually includes both your semantic and your episodic memories.
And finally, we have Zinchenko's level of recall, or LOR for short. The crucial point to remember here is his thesis: the amount of information you successfully retrieve is heavily determined by the specific goal of your learning action. Instructing yourself to process your textbook material at deeper, logical levels drastically hacks and improves your memory retention.
Which leaves us with this final thought. The next time you sit down to study, ask yourself, are you just blankly repeating your notes to keep them hovering on your short-term workbench, or are you actively forcing your brain to build logical connections, successfully hacking your level of recall? Stop passively reading. Start giving your brain deep, logical goals, and watch your exam scores completely transform. Thanks for learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.